The other day, I was speaking to a friend of mine. I asked, yaar, kama to acha raha hai. You have a very good job. He's working for a multinational company and really earning high package. So I just asked him, what exactly you do with the money which you are actually making? He said that I invest something in gold. I put some amount in savings. I put something into fixed deposit because mummy ne bola hai bachpan se. And there are a couple of other things which I do. And in this entire conversation, I was trying to look out when he would say stock market. I thought, yaar, Harshad Mehta ki series dekhi hai, so you must be doing that. But strangely, he wasn't. And then I just asked out of curiosity, don't you even invest into mutual funds? And he was like, ha, mutual funds, mein I do some sort of investments, but that's not a huge amount of investments I do. Then I asked, why don't you specifically invest into stock markets? And you know what he said? He told me a story. अरे बसवंती काका की जायदाद लूट गई थी, बर्बाद हो गए थे बिकॉज उन्होंने शेयर बाजार में पैसा लगाया था. शेयर बाजार सट्टा है. Before I could convince him, the very second note which he actually ended up with was, and come on, I'm not a chartered accountant. This is what he had to say. I've not done MBA in finance. I've not done anything special in my life related to finance. So I don't think so. I deserve to invest into the stock markets. And that's when I realized that there's so much of misinformation around with respect to stock markets that I need to come on this stage and clarify all those things. Now, you know what is interesting? One line which he said, yeah, mutual fund risky nahi hai, but stock market bahut risky hai. Now just imagine, people in our nation don't even understand that when you are investing via mutual fund, in most of the cases, you are actually investing into the stock market. Now you must be wondering कि यार ये बंदा आके क्यों शेयर बाजार के बारे में बात कर रहा है? That's because, ladies and gentlemen, I belong to the same fraternity. I am Abhishek, an investor cum trader speculating into the markets across the asset class for the past decade. In fact, more than that. I ventured into various asset class like equity, debt, bond, cryptos, जिसका आजकल trend है, NFT, etc. And that's why I thought, who better could actually address this issue? And by this end of session, you would be in a better position to judge कि stock market के लिए क्या कोई specialized degree लगती है या नहीं. So let me start off with this thing. First, you need to understand there is a very basic framework which, if you understand, you can really make a killing into the stock markets. And I am 100% sure at some point of time after earning money, you get introduced to stock markets and you want to earn money. So let me help you out with that. The first thing which you really need to understand is stop treating stock markets as if you are investing into equities. आप ये सोचो ही मत कि आप equities में invest करो. What do you have to think? You think that you are actually investing into business. And let me take you through my example. When I actually skim back and try to look into the past, this is what happened. Almost 6 years back, there was a lot of panic into the market. I'm pretty sure you can judge the kind of product I'm talking about. There was this FMCG company. Don't worry, FMCG means fast moving consumer good. Anything which we consume on a daily basis or quickly. So there was this FMCG company which was around the news. उसके अंदर lead निकला था. There was some product which all the youth actually consume on a daily basis, specifically students and hostelite. 2 minute में बन जाता है. Absolutely. So a lot of people were little scared. Oh my God, there's lead. अब तो खत्म हो जाएगा. While everyone was even panicking on the stock markets and selling the stock, I thought, Abhishek, let's take a stroll around and check out what exactly is happening. And you know what I observed? When I went on the ground reality, I found students were ready to pay 3 times just for the same product. Not just that, the demand had actually increased among students because there was enormous amount of craze. And that's when I thought that, okay, let's look around this company. And I realized this company has a history of more than 100 years. A big multinational company working hard for its PR and very good management. And they were struggling hard at that point of time, but I was pretty sure this is something which is going to happen on a temporary basis. You know what I did? Purely using my common sense, purely understanding how old this legacy is, I invested into that company. Long story short, I'm sitting on 3x of my capital, whatever I invested over there. Do you really think all this analysis required any sort of hardcore educational background? Do you think it required some financial knowledge? No, absolutely no. All it required is to think from a business perspective. And my dear friends, when you think from a business perspective, you got to understand one thing for sure, that businesses go through various hiccups. उतार चढ़ाव आते रहते हैं. एक average business को approximately 3 साल लगते हैं, 3 years in order to turn profitable. If something turns profitable before that, it's well and good, but mostly they take this time. An average business goes through a lot of drawdowns in its entire life cycle. बहुत बार उतार चढ़ाव आता है. But if the management is good, and if you understand the business, it's fairly good. So I tried to explain this to my friend. He was like, come on, Abhishek, okay, that's fine. This was a valid point, but can you just elaborate a little? Because my Kakaji, he had invested into a banking stock, which used to be one of the leading private sector banks, and now it is available at peanuts. I'm pretty sure a lot of you sitting over here can guess the bank. Let's not take the name, okay? So, he told he had invested almost his entire money out there, which was 5,999, and he lost it. And I'm like, okay, let me explain you this thing. When you're coming into stock markets, forget about educational qualification, you have to play with a sense of probabilities. And I'm 100% certain a lot of students sitting over here have at least heard the name probability, right? Yes. So, he said that the problem was that they were not playing with probabilities. When you're coming into equities, when you're coming into stock markets, it's a complete sin when you're actually putting everything right over there into one stock. Now just imagine for a while, if the same person would have even picked 4 or 5 more banks, if the same person would have picked 4 or 5 more maybe FMCG stocks, 4 or 5 textile stocks, wouldn't he be placed in a better position? Of course, yes. The technical term for it is diversification, but I don't think this requires a Harvard degree, this requires a Stanford degree or any other degree for per se. It just requires a bit of common sense and playing with probability. So it's very, very important that irrespective of whatever asset class you pick, you make sure you're not betting on a single asset class. So that's the other thing. Another important area was, he just opened up the newspaper. And you know what was there on the newspaper? Market गिर गया, market में भौचाल मची, 50 lakh crore का नुकसान, 50 lakh crore loss overnight. And he's like, see, you are talking about stock markets, and just now there is a news flash that this amount of money has been lost into the stock market. And I said, wait, there is a big thing which goes around into the market, and I call it the media fear. Media is always trying to sell you fear. Because admit or not, we easily get sold towards fearful news. And that's precisely what these media channels are good at doing. And that's why the moment there is a war, moment there's a drought situation, these media channels will keep on hyping that thing. But just think for a moment, when they talk about these billionaires losing billions and billions of dollars, do you really think that went out of their pockets? No, absolutely not. It's a notional value. In stock markets, until and unless you press that sell button, until and unless you exit out of your positions, you are actually not making a loss. So you need to first refrain from tips, services and media channels. With due respect, I'm not against media channels, but anything which is creating a fear in your mindsets, if you really, really want to play a long-term game. Because just imagine, let's reflect back into the past. 2 years back, almost 2.5 years back, something actually hit the markets called pandemic. Everyone was scared. Arey baap re, mask laga ke ghumo har jayega. But then you know what? Even stock markets reacted, because stock markets are a reflection of emotions which we all demonstrate. And there was a panic everywhere. Everything was falling. But do you know what? At that point of time, if someone completely ignored the news channels, if someone completely ignored all this pessimism which was out there, and simply thought from a longer perspective that if we look into the history of 100 years for stock markets across the globe, eventually, इंसान हो या stock market हो ऊपर ही जाता है, so they could have easily invested out there. So that's one thing that you should actually ignore. But now this friend of mine suddenly started getting curious that, यार अभिषेक अब interest आ रहा है, पैसा बन सकता लगता है. Tell me something more about it. I said, first, don't venture everywhere. Pick out your expertise. And believe me, each one of you who is sitting over here has got certain expertise. You might be working into IT, someone might be working into mechanical, someone must be working into, let's say, art and craft or something. If you know, there are more than 5,000 companies out there listed into the exchange. All you need to understand is a person who is from an IT background would understand the IT sector much, much, much better than anyone who is from a different domain. तो पहले आप समझो कि आपकी क्षमता क्या, कौन से सेक्टर को आराम से समझ सकते हो. Once you understand this thing, you would have a better position to find out where to invest. I have done plenty of mistakes. Previously, even I had fallen into the trap of tips. I had fallen into word of mouth. I had fallen into what Mama ji is saying or Mami ji is saying without even knowing they are not expert in those domains. They have just heard it from somewhere and they are trying to invest it over here. But then what I did is, I realized that okay, I need to sit down with a pen and paper and try to understand मेरी expertise कहाँ है and accordingly start investing. So that's the next thing which you got to identify. Each one of you sitting over here has some expertise. So that's the next thing which you need to do. Now finally, he asked, Abhishek, you are telling about so many things right now. But why is it so that we get so many tragic incidents out there? So many people lost fortune out there. So many people lost so much of things. तो मैंने कहा यार देख दो चीजें हैं which is lacking in today's generation as well as today's investors. First is patience. And I commonly say that patience is a rare commodity in supply these days. आजकल बहुत कमी है लोगों में patience की. 2 मिनट आप लाइन पे खड़े हो जाओ उसके बाद you feel impatient. That's precisely what happens into stock market. In stock market we are talking about years. There's this guy, legendary Warren Buffett, who invests and stays there for 30-40 years. At the age of 16 he says कि यार मैं तो late हो गया invest करने से. And I'm like अच्छा okay. So you got to understand that this market would test a lot of your patience, because just like any business, as I mentioned, it takes 3 to 4 years. Your businesses, in order to grow, would require a lot of time. And second is borrowed wisdom. You need to understand borrowed conviction doesn't work accurately into stock market. So borrowed tips, to be very specific. So if someone comes to you and says that I feel that this particular car company is going to be the next big thing, you have to be a little careful. Because these kind of opportunities don't just pop up like this thing. These are usually those opportunities which are rare, and you have to find it through your own intellect and common sense. And the more common sense you use, my dear friends, you will be in a better position to gauge whether to invest into stock markets or not. With that being said, now my dear friend who was on a cup of coffee, before the coffee got over, was pretty much convinced that okay, I think he makes sense. I think we should actually start investing into it. But then he had a final question. But what about those people who are taking high-five degrees from top universities? He named a few. He talked about some premier institutes from United States and UK. And I told him a very simple story. History is filled with such examples. We call something called funds or hedge funds. They are the ones who have mammoth size of funds they are managing. You know the interesting thing? Some of the biggest hedge funds had people from premier institutions, and yet they became bankrupt. I'm talking about they were from the top 10 or 20 institutions of the world, yet they become a bankrupt. Why? First, because of greed, and second, because of the lack of patience. So this pretty much signifies that it's not mandatory to have an educational qualification. So Abhishek, are you against education? Of course not. I'm in damn favor of education. What I only need to say over here is, if you really want to prosper in the field of stock markets, it's not mandatory to have a top-notch financial degree. With pure perseverance, with pure patience, with a lot of common sense and a lot of patience, you can eventually make mammoth size of wealth, if not early, in the future part. So my dear friends, I hope by now, most of you sitting over here would be fairly convinced कि हाँ यार, इश्क है तो रिस्क है तो ठीक है, but थोड़ा बहुत पैसा लगाया जा सकता है शेयर मार्केट में, and eventually you can make a lot of money out here. So I hope I did justice over here, coming over here and talking about a few fair points. And I believe after this session, a lot of people who are not even thinking of stock markets would at least for a brief moment of time think about stock markets. Thank you so much.